Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are unpacking a figure whose life was so intense, so intellectually rigorous, and so incredibly brief, just 39 years, that his story seems less like a biography and more like a cyclonic force of nature.
It really does. We're diving deep into the life and philosophy of Swami Vivekananda, born Narendranath Datta.
And if you, the listener, are trying to understand that exact moment Eastern philosophy truly intersected with the global stage at the turn of the 20th century, you really have to start here.
You do. Vivekananda wasn't just an Indian Hindu monk. He was a towering philosopher, the chief disciple of the mystic Ramakrishna, and I would argue the individual most responsible for introducing Vedanta and Yoga to the West.
And not just introducing them, but doing it in a structured, accessible, almost non-sectarian way.
Exactly, that was his genius.
His impact was monumental, and it was fundamentally dual, wasn't it? On one hand, you have him in the West, elevating Hinduism from this, exotic curiosity to a recognized world religion. He gave it a universal voice.
Right. And then on the other hand, back home in India, he was a massive catalyst for the emerging nationalist movement. He was the one who tied spiritual liberation directly to social service and political self-respect.
A very powerful combination.
An incredibly powerful combination. So our mission today is to trace the precise journey of this cyclonic monk, a title he actually earned in America.
We need to uncover that blend of what we get: aristocratic privilege, fierce intellectual skepticism, profound spiritual experience, and just this relentless drive that allowed him to do what he did.
To synthesize ancient wisdom and modern scientific thought. And in doing so, he created a legacy that really reshaped global spiritual dialogue.
Yeah.
We're using a stack of sources here that meticulously trace not just what he did, but how his philosophical architecture was actually constructed.
Okay, let's unpack this phenomenal life. We'll begin at the very root. Part 1, the formative years, from 1863 to 1888. This early period is just fascinating because it shows the internal tensions that would ultimately define his entire philosophy.
And his global mission. It all starts here. He was born Narendranath Datta on January 12, 1863 in Calcutta, and he was born into a wealthy, highly respected Bengali Kayastha family.
So the privilege of his background is key. It meant he had access to the best education, the most current global intellectual trends of the time. He wasn't starting from scratch.
Not at all. And crucially, the dynamics within his own home seemed to perfectly foreshadow the synthesis he would later embody.
Right. His father, Vishwanath Datta, he was a highly successful attorney at the Calcutta High Court.
Which means he represented a thoroughly progressive, rational, almost westernized attitude. It's the attitude that characterized the liberal Bengali elite under the British Raj.
So logic, worldliness, legal precision. That's one side of the coin.
That's one side. Now contrast that with his mother, Bhubaneswari Devi. She was the complete personification of devout Hindu piety. She was known for her patience, her profound devotion to the Puranas, and her deep spiritual temperament.
Vivekananda himself said he owed his knowledge to her, didn't he?
He did. He said he owed the efflorescence of his knowledge to her stories and the moral foundations she gave him. So you have this combination, Western rationality from his father and deep devotional spirituality from his mother. It was the essential crucible where his worldview was forged.
I really appreciate that the sources give us these small, memorable details that humanize him. He wasn't just born this detached philosopher.
No, far from it. He was described as incredibly restless, mischievous, sometimes a bit difficult to handle as a child.
And his mother had that famous joke about him.
She did. It really captures his energy. She said, "I prayed to Shiva for a son, and he has sent me one of his demons."
It suggests this powerful, almost untamable spiritual energy that was just looking for an outlet from day one.
And that energy found its first real outlet in his prodigious education and engagement with Western thought. Narendra was an almost frighteningly capable student. The sources describe him as an avid and, a prodigious reader across a massive range of disciplines.
History, literature, philosophy, mathematics, everything.
Everything. And his speed reading ability was legendary. He possessed what the ancient sources call a Shrutatara.
Which means what, exactly?
It literally means one who remembers what is heard. It essentially implies he had a near-perfect photographic or auditory memory.
So he could consume entire books in a single sitting and recall them verbatim years later?
Precisely. And this is crucial for you to understand, because his mind wasn't just quick. It was architecturally capable of holding and reconciling vast, complex, often contradictory systems of knowledge.
He started at the Metropolitan Institution and then went on to the General Assembly's institution.
That's right, graduating with a BA in 1884. And the records show he was the only student that year to receive first division marks in the entrance exam.
So he immediately stood out. He was an intellectual giant among his peers.
No question. And the curriculum he tackled just highlights his future philosophical balancing act. On the one hand, he was completely immersed in the foundational Hindu scriptures. The Vedas, the core Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, the Puranas. He knew the source texts inside and out.
But at the very same time, he was diving deep into Western intellectual history.
Deep. He's studying Western logic, philosophy, European history, and he's tackling the absolute giants of the European Enlightenment and beyond.
We're talking about David Hume's empiricism, the transcendental idealism of Kant and Hegel,
The severe pessimism of Schopenhauer, John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, and, most critically, the new biological theories of Charles Darwin.
and this is where his mind really starts to synthesize. He wasn't just passively reading this stuff.
No, he was actively engaging with it. The sources show he was particularly captivated by Herbert Spencer's theory of evolutionism. He even corresponded with Spencer.
And he translated Spencer's book, Education, into Bengali.
He did. He was actively trying to find a mechanism, a bridge, to reconcile ancient spiritual cosmology with modern materialist scientific evolution. This tension is where his genius lies.
And his college principal, William Hastie, he saw this unique capacity in him, didn't he?
He did. He delivered a truly prophetic verdict. Hastie said that Narendranath was a lad of his talents and possibilities, bound to make his mark in life.
So here's this young man equipped with the skepticism of the West and the spiritual depth of the East.
And it's that deep skepticism that propels the next crucial phase. The spiritual quest and Brahmo influences, all that academic philosophy he devoured, both Western and Eastern, it just left him fundamentally cold.
He found the theories intellectually brilliant, perhaps, but they lacked any direct experiential proof of the divine.
Exactly. This hunger for direct, verifiable experience led him into the social and religious movements of the time. He got involved with Keshab Chandra Sen's Navavidhan and the Sadharan Brahmo Samaj. This was a critical influence.
So let's unpack that a little for the listener. What was the Brahmo Samaj, and why was it so important for a young man like him grappling with all these Western ideas?
Well, the Brahmo Samaj was a monotheistic movement of Hindu reformation. It was highly rationalized. It rejected Hindu polytheism, ritualism, and the restrictions of the caste system.
And it adopted a theology that was rooted in a more modern intellectual reading of the Upanishads and Vedanta.
Precisely. It was explicitly bridging Hindu thought with Western intellectual movements like Unitarianism and Transcendentalism. So for Narendra, it was the perfect intellectual transition, a form of Hinduism that was rational, non-idolatrous, and socially progressive.
And he was active in service, too. He joined the Band of Hope, which was about discouraging things like smoking and drinking among young people.
He was putting his reformed moral philosophy into action, but the intellectual skepticism that remained dominant. And it crystallized into one single, critical, repeated question. This marked what the sources called the real beginning of his intellectual quest.
He started going around to every prominent, educated resident of Calcutta that he could find.
And he asked them this simple but just devastating question: have you seen God?
And the philosophers gave him theory, the scholars gave him texts.
The social reformers gave him ethical answers, but none of them, not one, satisfied the young, brilliant skeptic.
There's the story of him meeting Debendranath Tagore, the leader of the Brahmo Samaj.
Yes, and when he put the question to him, Tagore didn't answer directly. He just looked at him and observed, "My boy, you have the yogi's eyes."
So his spiritual hunger was recognized, but the intellectual satisfaction was still elusive. He needed a guru who could provide not theory, but proof.
And that search for proof leads directly to the defining confrontation of his life, meeting Ramakrishna and the defining clash.
And the introduction, ironically, came from the Western-educated intellectual establishment he was part of.
It did. It was his professor, William Hastie, who provided the catalyst. He was lecturing on the nature of ecstasy in Wordsworth's poem, The Excursion, and he suggested that his students, especially Narendra, should visit the mystic Ramakrishna of Dakshinswar to truly understand what trance and spiritual vision really meant.
The meeting happened in late 1881 or early 1882, and it was anything but an instant conversion.
Not at all. Narendra, armed with his Brahmo principles of formless God, of vehement opposition to image worship, he arrived utterly prepared to reject Ramakrishna.
So let's dramatize this clash. What did Narendra see at Dakshineswar that he found so objectionable?
He saw ecstatic behavior, visions, a fervent, almost childlike devotion to the goddess Kali, complete with idol worship. To a rational Brahmo, this was anathema.
Ramakrishna's lack of formal education must have also fueled his intellectual disdain.
Absolutely. Narendra dismissed Ramakrishna's spiritual ecstasies as mere figments of imagination, or worse, hallucinations. He even wondered if it was some kind of nervous illness.
And most critically, he rejected the philosophical core of Ramakrishna's tradition, Advaita Vedanta.
That's the key, this non-dual teaching, which asserts the identity of the individual soul with the absolute, Brahman. Narendra, the intellectual, ridiculed this as pure, unadulterated blasphemy and badness. It just flew in the face of his Western logic and his Brahmo-rationalized theology.
But Ramakrishna's genius was not to argue back with him.
No, he was famously unperturbed by Narendra's intense skepticism and his intellectual attacks. He simply told Narendra, try to see the truth from all angles. And then he asked Narendra his own question, can you sing?
And Narendra was a talented musician.
Very talented. He sang. And as he sang, the sources note, Ramakrishna entered a state of bhava samadhi ecstasy and then touched Narendra. And in that moment, Narendra felt a profound, undeniable shift in his consciousness.
That touch was the first powerful, non-rational challenge to his entire intellectual edifice. But the real turning point, the point of surrender, it wasn't philosophical or spiritual, was it? It was profoundly personal and rooted in a worldly crisis.
It was. In 1884, his father died suddenly, and the family was left absolutely destitute.
One day they're a wealthy aristocratic family, and the next they're facing eviction and creditors.
Exactly. And Narendra, the brilliant student, found himself struggling unsuccessfully to find work. He couldn't provide for his mother and his siblings. He experienced poverty, hunger, and humiliation firsthand.
The sources say that during this period of existential questioning, when his education failed to offer any practical salvation, his visits to Ramakrishna increased exponentially. He was looking for any kind of relief.
This led to the legendary moment of the prayer. Narendra was desperate for his family's welfare, and Ramakrishna, recognizing this deep-seated need, urged him to go into the temple and pray directly to the Divine Mother Kali for financial assistance.
And Narendra went, not once, but 3 times to the temple, intending to follow his guru's instructions. But what happened each time he stood before the image of Kali?
He found himself completely unable to ask for money or food or any worldly needs. The words for material gain just would not leave his mouth.
So what did he pray for?
The first time, he prayed for true knowledge and renunciation. The second time, the same thing. The third time, Ramakrishna chastised him and sent him back one last time. But again, Narendra prayed only for true knowledge, devotion, and purity.
That moment is the ultimate surrender. The intellectual skeptic, the Brahmo who scorned idol worship, finally yields his rational intellect and his urgent worldly needs to a deeper spiritual calling.
He recognizes Ramakrishna as his true guru and becomes ready to renounce everything for the sake of God realization. The financial struggle was the practical mechanism that forced the spiritual choice.
Following this, during Ramakrishna's final illness from throat cancer in 1885, Narendra and the other disciples cared for him at Kasipur. This was essentially the world's most unique and most intensive spiritual retreat.
It was. And it was at Kasipur that Narendra achieved the very state he had once ridiculed, Nirvikalpa Samadhi.
This is such a crucial detail for you, the listener, to grasp. What is Nirvikalpa Samadhi?
It's described as the ultimate meditative state, the complete merging of the individual consciousness with the absolute, where all sense of duality, all separation is completely obliterated.
So experiencing this state was the direct experiential refutation of all his academic skepticism.
It was the proof. He proved to himself in the most profound way possible that Advaita Vedanta was not madness, it was reality.
And with that spiritual realization secured, Ramakrishna formally established his first monastic order. He gave Narendra and several others ochre robes.
And crucially, he passed the mantle to Narendra, asking the other disciples to recognize him as their leader. And he imparted the core teaching that would define Vivekananda's entire mission.
Service to men was the most effective worship of God.
That's the seed of Karma Yoga right there.
After Ramakrishna's death in August 1886, the disciples faced immediate instability.
They did. But Narendra gathered them. and they converted a dilapidated house at Baranagar into the first Ramakrishna Math.
And this wasn't some cushioned beginning, was it? The commitment to austerity was absolute.
Completely absolute. They lived primarily on Madhukari Holi, begging just to sustain themselves and raise the rent. Narendra later recalled the intensity of those early days, emphasizing their complete detachment. We had no thought even as to whether the world existed or not.
The transformation from Narendranath Datta to the dedicated monk was then formalized in December 1886.
Yes, on Christmas Eve, when he and 8 others took their formal monastic vows, they committed to a life of renunciation and discipline, preparing themselves, though they didn't know it yet, for a global mission.
Which sets the stage perfectly for part 2. The global stage, 1888 to 1897. This is the period where the local ascetic steps onto the world stage, and that philosophical tension between renunciation and action really begins to express itself.
In 1888, Narendra left the Math. He became a Parivrajaka, the classical Indian wandering monk.
Which means without fixed abode, without ties, independent and strangers wherever they go.
Exactly. He traveled extensively across India for 5 years, living only on alms. His simple possessions are so symbolic.
A water pot, a staff, and just 2 books. One was the foundational Hindu text, the Bhagavad Gita.
And the other, significantly, was the Imitation of Christ. This just confirms that his spiritual search was already universal, drawing inspiration from both the East and the West.
This period of wandering, living on bhiksha or alms, and traveling by foot, it was absolutely foundational for him.
It was his real-world PhD in Indian social reality. He gained first-hand knowledge of the devastating poverty, the harsh living conditions of the Indian masses under British India, and the deep-seated issues of caste discrimination.
So this pilgrimage wasn't just for his own personal spiritual enlightenment.
Far from it. This first-hand exposure transformed him from a philosopher concerned with abstract spiritual liberation, or moksha, into a social reformer driven by the suffering of the nation.
He resolved that his spiritual knowledge had to be used to uplift the nation and alleviate the suffering he was witnessing every single day.
That direct, practical engagement with the suffering masses fundamentally shaped his later philosophy of service.
And just before he left for the West, his patron, Raja Ajit Singh of Khetri, gave him his new final identity.
He suggested the name Vivekananda, which means the bliss of discerning wisdom. And as Swami Vivekananda, he set sail from Bombay in May 1893, bound for Chicago and the world's Parliament of Religions.
This was a colossal gamble. He had no official backing, meager funds. He arrives in Chicago in the summer of 1893 and immediately hits a major roadblock.
A huge one. The Parliament required formal credentials from a bona fide organization, and the application deadline had already passed.
So here he is, a monk from a small, recently founded, completely unaccredited monastery on the banks of the Ganga. He's stranded, he's broke, and he has no official sanction. How did he overcome this?
Purely through the force of his personality and intellect. He traveled from Chicago to Boston and ended up contacting Professor John Henry Wright of Harvard University.
An eminent classical scholar.
Very eminent, and upon meeting Vivekananda and listening to him speak, Wright was instantly and profoundly impressed by his intellect and his presence.
Wright's famous quote really is the moment Western academia bowed to the power of the East.
It is, he said. To ask for your credentials is like asking the sun to state its right to shine in the heavens.
What a line. That comparison, seeing Vivekananda as the source of natural, undeniable illumination, that was the key that opened the door.
It was. Wright provided the crucial letter of recommendation, and Vivekananda was officially registered as a monk.
So the Parliament opens on September 11th, 1893, at the Art Institute of Chicago. It was designed to showcase the world's religions in the spirit of comparative harmony. But nobody was prepared for Vivekananda.
Nobody. When it came time for his brief address representing Hinduism, the sources described this moment of pure theatrical and spiritual drama. He bows to Saraswati, the Hindu goddess of learning.
And then he begins with those 5 electrifying words that just immediately erased the formality of the whole Victorian setting.
Sisters and brothers of America.
And the response was explosive.
Completely explosive. The audience of 7,000 people erupted in a spontaneous 2-minute standing ovation. Think about the cultural context. This was unprecedented formality, yet this young monk commanded such immediate magnetic authority.
And when the applause finally subsided, he continued, praising the youngest nation on behalf of the most ancient order of monks, a religion which has taught the world both tolerance and universal acceptance.
The core of his message was simple, but absolutely revolutionary in that context. Religious pluralism. He quoted the Bhagavad Gita. "Whosoever comes to me Through whatsoever form I reach him, all men are struggling through paths that, in the end, lead to me.
It was a direct, elegant counterpoint to the prevailing missionary narratives of the time, which often presented Eastern religions as inherently inferior or pagan. He was asserting equal validity.
And the American press recognized the paradigm shift immediately. They dubbed him the cyclonic monk from India.
And the New York Herald printed that staggering assessment. Vivekananda is undoubtedly the greatest figure in the Parliament of Religions. After hearing him, we feel how foolish it is to send missionaries to this learned nation.
I mean, that line didn't just praise him. It fundamentally challenged the entire infrastructure of Western religious superiority. It was a geopolitical statement wrapped in a spiritual assessment.
Following Chicago, he entered the crucial phase of establishing the Western presence. He lectured widely across the U.S. and the U.K. for nearly 2 years, not just preaching, but setting up institutional roots for Vedanta.
And his mission statement was one of universal self-improvement, not conversion. He articulated it so beautifully.
I do not come to convert you to a new belief. I want you to keep your own belief. I want to make the Methodist a better Methodist.
The Presbyterian, a better Presbyterian.
Yeah.
I want to teach you to live the truth, to reveal the light within your own soul.
He framed his teaching as a technique for realizing one's inherent divinity, a philosophical universal that applied regardless of your existing religion.
And in 1894, he formalized this work by founding the Vedanta Society of New York, which laid the foundation for dozens of Vedanta centers globally.
His success brought serious academic attention. And this is where we see that tension between his public mission and his personal monastic commitment play out so dramatically.
He was offered the chair of Eastern philosophy at Harvard and a similar position at Columbia University.
And he turned them both down. That seems so counterintuitive. Why reject the very institutional platforms that could have amplified his message exponentially?
He rejected them precisely because of the structure of his commitment. His duty was to Ramakrishna's mission and his monastic vows, which mandated a life of renunciation and selfless service, not academic careerism or celebrity.
Accepting those positions would have entangled him in the very frameworks he was trying to transcend.
Exactly. He needed to be a sannyasin, a wandering renouncer who taught, not a professor on staff. It was a powerful, structural affirmation of his core ideal.
And that very commitment attracted these incredibly influential figures, crossing every intellectual barrier. The list includes the pragmatic psychologist William James,
The pioneering scientist Nikola Tesla, the iconic actress Sarah Bernhardt, and the renowned Indologist Max Muller.
He even influenced Tesla's thought process, didn't he? Specifically with the concepts of prana, energy, and akasha, matter or ether.
He did. Tesla saw Vivekananda's teachings as providing a potential framework for unifying Western physics with ancient cosmology. This shows how seriously his ideas were being taken by the leading scientific minds of the day.
Let's talk about the birth of modern yoga in the West. He was so successful because he didn't just dump ancient texts on his audience. He adapted Hindu ideas, fitting them into the pre-existing philosophical framework of Western esotericism.
Things like transcendentalism, which already valued Eastern wisdom, and New Thought, which focused on mind power and self-improvement. He was speaking their language.
And this synthesis resulted in his systematic teaching of the 4 yogas.
Right. Raja Yoga for mental discipline, Karma Yoga for selfless work, Bhakti Yoga for devotion, and Jnana Yoga for philosophy. He presented this as a practical, comprehensive model for spiritual self-realization, tailored to different human temperaments.
And Raja Yoga seems to have been the real game changer in the West.
It was. His book, Raja Yoga, published in 1896, was an interpretation and adaptation of Patanjali's ancient Yoga Sutras. He demystified the process, stripping away the esoteric language.
He presented hatha yoga and meditation practices in a way that appealed to a scientific, achievement-oriented Western audience.
Emphasizing that yoga was not merely ritualistic, but a systematic, testable method for attaining self-control and realization.
The sources confirm it was an instant publishing success. Some scholars mark the publication of Raja Yoga as the defining moment, the beginning of modern, non-sectarian yoga in the West.
It moved yoga beyond esoteric circles and into the cultural mainstream of physical and mental self-improvement. He even established a practical setting for this teaching, founding a retreat in the mountains of California called the Peace Retreat, or Shanti Asrama, for his students.
So he was creating both the theoretical framework and the physical infrastructure needed for the ongoing transmission of these practices.
He was building a sustainable movement. But while he was conquering the West, he never forgot India. His letters back to his disciples during this period are just full of urgency and fire.
They're essentially a practical manual for social reform. He wrote so powerfully, demanding immediate practical action from his fellow monks.
Things like, no good will come of sitting idle and having princely dishes and saying, Ramakrishna, O Lord, unless you can do some good to the poor. Go from door to door amongst the poor and lower classes, and teach them religion. Also, let them have oral lessons on geography and such other subjects.
This is a clear, radical move from the traditional monastic ideal of renunciation for personal salvation to a new ideal, renunciation for public service.
He established that service to humanity was the path to the highest spiritual realization.
And when he finally returned to India in 1897, landing in Colombo, the welcome was unlike anything seen before.
It was incredible. People, common folk, students, rajas, they showed their fervor by literally sitting on the train rails to force the train to stop just so they could hear him speak. He was returning as a conquering spiritual hero.
Upon his return to India, his message shifted dramatically to address the colonial context and the poverty.
Completely. While he emphasized India's spiritual heritage in the West, in India he stressed immediate practical social issues, uplifting the people, promoting science and industrialization, eliminating the caste system, and laying the groundwork for ending colonial rule.
These powerful lectures, which were later published as lectures from Colombo to Almora, they were the spiritual and philosophical fuel for the nationalist fire.
He told India that its immediate God was its people, the poor, the downtrodden, and that true national strength came from realizing the divine potential in every single citizen.
This philosophy culminated in the formal creation of the Ramakrishna Mission on May 1st, 1897 in Calcutta.
This was the institutional embodiment of Karma Yoga, dedicated explicitly to large-scale social service, education, and humanitarian relief, separate from the purely religious monastic order.
That distinction is important. You have the Ramakrishna Math as the monastic wing for religious practice and training monks.
And then the Ramakrishna Mission as the service organization focused on hospitals, schools, and disaster relief. Both were headquartered at Belur Math, but the duality of purpose was intentional. It reflected the duality in Vivekananda's own mission.
And his renown was such that he was offered a powerful opportunity in the world of industry by Jamsetji Tata.
Yes, the great industrialist who founded the Tata Group. He offered Vivekananda the head position of his ambitious new Research Institute of Science.
A vision they had conceived together on a shared voyage back in 1893.
It was an enormous opportunity to shape modern India's scientific and industrial future. But Vivekananda again declined. He cited a conflict with his spiritual interests.
So just as he refused academic celebrity, he refused industrial celebrity. His role was spiritual guidance and social reform.
He maintained that boundary between the math, which was spiritual, and the mission, which was service.
That sets the perfect context for Part 3, the synthesized philosophy in final years, 1899-1902. We really need to dissect the philosophical architecture that allowed him to bridge the absolute transcendence of Advaita with the radical engagement of Karma Yoga.
What Vivekananda synthesized and popularized is rightfully called Neo-Vedanta. He took the traditional Advaita Vedanta of Adi Shankara, the non-dual philosophy that says only Brahman is real and the world is illusion, or Maya, and he made it fully practical, functional, and universal for the modern age.
But how did he reconcile the ultimate renunciation demanded by classical Advaita with the fierce social action he demanded through the Ramakrishna Mission? That's the core tension, isn't it?
It is, and he achieved this through the teachings of Ramakrishna. Classical Advaita emphasizes Brahman as nirguna, qualityless, formless, absolute, and transcendent.
Right.
But Ramakrishna taught that Brahman is also saguna qualified, with attributes, and immanent in the world. So Vivekananda's Neo-Vedanta asserts that the absolute is both impersonal and personal, both transcendent and immanent. It fundamentally reconciles dualism and non-dualism.
So if the divine is immanent, if it's present everywhere, in everything, that completely changes the nature of service.
Precisely. This philosophical leap led to the practical application known as Shivajnana Shiva Seva,
Which means?
the spiritual practice of serving human beings as actual manifestations of the divine. You aren't serving humanity charitably. You are worshiping God through the human form.
So it turns social work into the highest spiritual discipline. Karma Yoga becomes the practical vehicle for Advaita realization.
That is the genius of the synthesis. The deepest spiritual realization, that all is one. Advaita demands the highest level of social action, treating everyone, especially the poor, with the reverence you would give to Shiva, to God.
It fundamentally redefined religion for the modern era. And this is all encapsulated in his universal goal, his core statement of religious teaching.
Each soul is potentially divine.
Let's review that full statement because it really is his single most profound philosophical legacy for you, the listener.
He stated, "The goal is to manifest this divinity within by controlling nature, external and internal. Do this either by work or worship or mental discipline or philosophy, by one or more or all of these, and be free."
This is the whole of religion. Doctrines or dogmas or rituals or books or temples or forms are but secondary details.
It's so empowering because it makes God realization achievable by everyone, regardless of their dogma. It's a completely non-sectarian, self-empowering spiritual framework, which explains its explosive success in the West.
And that success was also driven by his deep understanding of Western esotericism and universalism. His early exposure to the Brahmo Samaj, and even a brief earlier involvement in a Freemasonry lodge and the Band of Hope, exposed him to this wide, syncretic, cultic milieu of Western thought.
He knew the language of the intellectual elite he needed to convince. He could speak to followers of transcendentalism who already valued intuition in Eastern texts, and to followers of New Thought who emphasized mental control and positive thinking.
A key example is his use of the concept of involution.
Right. This idea posits the descent or the involvement of divine consciousness into matter. And while the term has roots in Samkhya terminology, his frequent use of it in the West suggests influence from Darwin's evolutionism and Western theosophy.
So how did involution reconcile ancient cosmology with modern science?
Well, Darwin explained evolution as the ascent of matter over time, achieving complexity. Vivekananda used involution to explain the origin of that potential. The spirit first descends or involves itself into matter, giving matter the potential for consciousness.
And evolution then becomes the process of the spirit unfolding itself back out of matter.
A spiral journey, not just an upward line. This allowed him to embrace evolution without reducing reality solely to material processes. It was an incredibly sophisticated philosophical move.
This level of mental discipline required a fierce moral philosophy. He saw morality not as a set of arbitrary rules, but as directly linked to mind control and the harnessing of energy.
He strongly championed truth, purity, and unselfishness as the three foundational traits that stabilize and strengthen the mind for spiritual realization.
And centrally, he taught and practiced brahmacharya.
Complete celibacy. He believed it was the essential source of the immense physical and mental stamina and the legendary eloquence that defined his short, intense public life.
Despite this rigorous discipline, his health began to decline rapidly under the strain of his global travels and relentless work. He suffered from chronic insomnia, asthma, and severe diabetes.
And yet he still undertook his second visit to the West and final illness between 1899 and 1900.
He was driven by the goal of stabilizing the Western centers he had created.
He was. He returned, establishing more Vedanta societies and cementing the importance of the Shanti Asrama in California. His last major public appearance abroad was at the Congress of Religions in Paris in 1900.
And even here, while he was clearly unwell, he was tackling complex, sophisticated subjects like the worship of the lingam and defending the historical authenticity of the Bhagavad Gita.
It shows his willingness to bring these sophisticated Hindu concepts to a global academic audience without dumbing them down.
Following Paris, he visited several European and Mediterranean cities, Vienna, Istanbul, Athens, before returning, utterly exhausted, to Belur Math in December 1900.
For the next year and a half, his activity was heavily restricted by his deteriorating health, yet he continued to coordinate the mission's expanding work through his disciples.
The sources confirm the profound and poignant details of his death on July 4, 1902. He lived his philosophy until the very last moment.
That final day was a perfect encapsulation of his life's mission. He awoke early and meditated for 3 full hours at Belur Math.
And afterwards, he taught Sanskrit grammar, the philosophy of yoga, and the Shukla Yajurveda to his pupils.
And then discussed detailed plans for establishing a Vedic college in the Ramakrishna Math.
He went into meditation around 7 p.m., asking not to be disturbed. He died at 9:20 p.m. while meditating, fulfilling his own prophecy that he would not live to see 40 years. He was only 39.
And while medical reports suggested a rupture of a blood vessel in the brain, his disciples attributed his death to his Brahmarandra, the opening in the crown of the head associated with spiritual realization being pierced when he attained Masamadhi.
The final great meditative absorption, so the cause was spiritual transcendence.
That was their understanding. He was cremated on the bank of the Ganga at Belur, perfectly opposite the spot where Ramakrishna had been cremated 16 years earlier.
As we conclude this deep dive, we have to look at part 4, enduring influence and legacy. Given the phenomenal scope of his work and the absolute brevity of his life, his impact is truly staggering.
His role in Indian nationalism and social reform just cannot be overstated. He is celebrated as a patriotic saint, and his birthday, January 12th, is observed nationally as National Youth Day.
He gave unprecedented spiritual and moral substance to the nationalist ideal in British-ruled India. He vehemently focused intense attention on the extent of poverty, arguing that the true awakening of India lay in uplifting the masses.
He wanted to set in motion a machinery which will bring noblest ideas to the doorstep of even the poorest and the meanest.
And this focus on practical social duty, framed as the highest form of worship, profoundly influenced the next generation of leaders.
Absolutely. Sri Aurobindo considered Vivekananda the spiritual architect who awakened India, while Mahatma Gandhi counted him among the few Hindu reformers whose work ensured the continued splendor of the religion. He legitimized social reform as a spiritual necessity.
We also have to fully appreciate his role in the global spread of Hinduism and yoga. He is considered the single most successful and influential missionary of Vedanta to the Western world, period.
His Neo-Vedanta provided the essential, non-dogmatic template. By universalizing core Hindu concepts and making them psychological and practical, manifesting the divine within through self-effort, he created the philosophical context for the enthusiastic reception of nearly every subsequent form of Indian spiritual self-improvement that followed.
Things like modern yoga, transcendental meditation, and countless other gurus.
He paved the way for all of them.
And that idea he championed in Chicago, that all sects within Hinduism and all religions are simply different paths to the same ultimate goal, that is now a core defining tenet of modern global Hinduism.
They transformed it into a universalist faith, not merely a parochial tradition.
Lastly, let's just touch on the sheer volume of his commemorations and works. His spontaneous lectures and writings are collected in the comprehensive complete works of Swami Vivekananda, which gives a full view of his mind.
And two specific published works really encapsulate his twin missions. First, that collection of his rousing speeches, Lectures from Colombo to Almora, and second, the important Bengali essay, Bartman Farad, or Present-Day India, from 1899.
Which was a clear manifesto urging readers to honor every Indian as a brother, regardless of caste or poverty.
His legacy is honored globally. Beyond the institutions bearing his name, the fact that the day of his Parliament speech, September 11th, is still observed as World Brotherhood Day just shows how his message of religious tolerance remains the dominant interpretation of his life's work.
This is truly fascinating. Vivekananda was a mind capable of mastering these fundamental dualities. East versus West philosophy, intense intellectual rigor versus profound spiritual practice, and, most centrally, ultimate renunciation versus radical social action. He was able to recontextualize ancient texts for a modern universal audience.
And the contrast between his personal spiritual achievement and his public mission is what makes his life such a deep dive. He pursued and he attained Nirvikalpa Samadhi, ultimate non-dual realization, the freedom from the world and all its suffering.
Yet, having attained that freedom, he immediately devoted the remaining years of his short life to fierce, practical social duty, asserting that service to the poorest, most suffering human being was the highest form of worship.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Vivekananda was the man who experienced the absolute transcendence, yet he founded an organization dedicated to material engagement with the world's most basic needs.
If the highest spiritual goal, the freedom from the cycle of birth and death, is detachment, how is it that Vivekananda taught that the ultimate expression of that transcendence is radical, tireless, practical social service? What does the reconciliation of spiritual transcendence with fierce social duty imply about the application of true knowledge in your own life? That's the challenge he leaves us all to ponder.